All right, we have been in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Let's jump back there tonight. Second Samuel chapter 15. We made it about halfway through the chapter last time. We were able to see Absalom's rebellion really come to full fruition. He has used his return to Jerusalem and his audience with the king to further his cause. Absalom has undercut David's leadership by political means and vague promises of things being better. You know, man, if I were judge, I'd make sure your cause was heard. And man, I'm really sorry that there's no one that's going to be able to handle your case. And just everywhere that he could, undercutting David's leadership. And with his aspirations, it says that he's stolen the hearts of the children of Israel. And in our chapter this week, or last week, he set himself up at Hebron as David's successor and sounded forth on the trumpet to let people know that Absalom reigneth. David sees what's happened, and for risk of his life, for risk of his family, David has taken his family, gathered them and his close companions, and they have left Jerusalem. What we're going to see tonight in the rest of chapter number 15, both among David and among his companions, are the different ways that they respond to this trouble, and different ways that we can and often do, hopefully, respond to trouble. Now, when I say respond to trouble, it's not likely that we are to face the same things that David was facing here. David's in a great bit of sorrow as he leaves Jerusalem. He absolutely feels like it's his fault, right? David knew after the events of chapters 11 and 12 and the word of Nathan that came to him, David knew that there was trouble coming down the road for his family. When God sent the promise through the prophet that the sword would not leave your house, David knew that there would be trouble coming, but there's probably no way that he could have foreseen all that meant. There's no way that he could have foreseen that one of his sons would kill the other. There's no way that he could have foreseen that one of his sons might try to kill him. And so David is in a great deal of anxiety again and worry for his family, for his companions, for those that are close to him and still left alive. And there's nothing worse than feeling like this is my fault. I brought this upon us, as he looks at what's happening with Absalom. So at the end of verse number 18, he's gathered his close ones. He's gathered those that were faithful and loyal to him. And they have decided to leave Jerusalem. So tonight, let's take our lesson, Facing Trouble, Still Faithful. And let's read through the rest of this chapter and let's find the responses that David and his men find in these times of trouble. Number one, faithful foreigners. Faithful foreigners. Verse number 19, we'll pick up. It says, Then said the king to Ittai the Gittite, Wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place, and abide with the king, for thou art a stranger, and also an exile. Now, if you recall from verse number 18, it says that there were 600 men of Gath that were joined unto David. And from our stories, we remember these men have been with David for a long time. In fact, all the way back to 1 Samuel chapters 27, 1 Samuel chapter 30, there were times that David, when he was on the run from King Saul, there were times that when David was in exile himself and he came into the land of the Philistines, gained this loyal following, this small band of men that were loyal to David through thick and thin, that protected him in times of his wilderness wandering. Though many of those are still with him. They have been loyal. They have seen David elevated in Jerusalem, elevated to be king, restoring Israel to a greater glory than really they had ever seen. So probably restoring is not really the right word, because Israel attained a spot of glory that they didn't have under the judges, that they didn't have under Saul. And so these are a band, in verse number 18, of faithful men. Now among that group, David spots a newcomer. Someone he either didn't recognize or maybe hadn't seen before. He says in verse 19 to this Ittai, Wherefore goest thou also with us? Return to thy place and abide with the king, For thou art a stranger and also an exile. Whereas thou camest but yesterday, should I this day make thee go up and down with us, seeing I go whither I may? Return thou and take back thy brethren. Mercy and truth be with thee. When David sees this procession of his faithful supporters, it's obviously touching. It means something to him. It matters to him, these people that have been loyal to him through thick and thin, that have been by his side. Among them, among this group of Gittites, these ones from Gath, he sees one he doesn't really recognize, or one that he's not met personally before, one that's a newcomer to the group. And it's touching to him that even a newly arrived person would be so loyal and would leave Jerusalem with him. Now he encourages Ittai to return and to stay. When he says in verse number 20, should I this day make thee to go up and down with us, seeing I go whither I may? Basically, David's telling him, listen, buddy, I have no promises to give you. I can't guarantee your safety. I can't tell you what's next. If you follow me, I can't promise you the hope of a better future. I can't promise you that this works out. I can't promise you that everything turns out okay. Where I'm going, I'm going. I'm going whither I may. However this works out, it works out. But it's okay if you need to stay. And in fact, at the end of verse number 20, when he says, mercy and truth be with thee, David is perfectly willing to release Ittai and some of these other Gittites and let them know, listen, no hard feelings. I don't know what's in store. I don't know if Absalom's going to hunt us down. I don't know. I can't make any promises. And so if you and your family, if you and your brethren, if you need to stay, stay. It's okay. And David was willing to these men that had shown so much loyalty and faithfulness to him in times past. David recognizes that, and it's touching, and it means something to him. And it's okay. You've followed me thus far, but I don't know what's happening next. And if you need to turn back, mercy and truth be with thee. He's loyal, though it says in verse 21, that Ittai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, and as my Lord the king liveth, surely in what place my Lord the king shall be, whether in death or in life, even there also will thy servant be. He's promised to be loyal to King David, even though there's potential for it to cost him something. And that's what, Geisig points out, that true loyalty isn't demonstrated until it's likely to cost something to be loyal. True loyalty is determined in difficulty. It's then and there that you have the opportunity to prove ourselves. It's easy to be loyal to David when he's on a throne. It's easy to be loyal to David, like I said, when he's surrounded by royal comforts, when you've followed David from the beginning and you've seen his elevation. And now he's admired and he's respected and he sits in royal glory. It's easy to be loyal then when all the rest of the crowd loves David too. But now we're not sure. And Absalom has stolen the hearts of many of the children of Israel. David is now on the run. And yet this is where their mettle is tested. This is where they're finally going to be able to prove their loyalty to him. In the face of jeopardy, Absalom gaining and growing in power, he's coming for Jerusalem himself. Now what would these men do? And David even gave them an out. Right? What would you do, right? David's not questioning these men. He's giving them an out. You've been faithful to me. I understand if you need to go. I need to understand if you need to turn back. No hard feelings. Mercy and truth be with you. David knows he has no future to offer these men, or at least not to promise them. So he's not going to hold it against them if they don't follow this time. And yet that is exactly when faithful men are needed the most. Is when there's not that surety. It's when there's not that promise of the next day. That's when loyalty and faithfulness are really needed and when they matter the most. And that is when Ittai and these other men stand up and they're willing to proclaim, according to verse 21, as the Lord liveth and as my Lord the king liveth, surely in what place my Lord the king shall be, whether in death or in life, even there will thy servant be. The Bible says if we faint in the day of adversity, our strength is small. It doesn't do much to proclaim our strength when there's nothing to be strong about it. There's nothing to proclaiming our strength, our loyalty, or our faithfulness if we're never in a spot where it actually gets tested, where it actually gets put on trial, and there's actually something there. These men are in that spot, and their faithfulness to David means the world to him. Let me show you something. In 2 Samuel, just turn over a couple pages. Look at chapter 18. We all remember who David's cousins were. We all remember the story of Joab and Abishai. But in 2 Samuel 18, in verse number 1, it says that David numbered the people that were with him and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Same things are mentioned in verse 5 and verse 12 of chapter 18. This man's loyalty to David was rewarded. He was elevated to a place even equal at times, a place of leadership, a place in charge of his army with Joab, right? Our general that we've talked about, like him or hate him, Joab, patriotic as ever, and yet what Ittai did meant something to David. Don't read that he's elevated to this level in 2 Samuel 18 and miss that he's a foreigner. This is a man from Gath. This is a man from outside the normal realm, and yet has proved his loyalty to King David. And that means something. It means something because it came at a time when it was desperately needed. All right, back to our text, chapter 15. Number 2, let's look at submission and surrender. Submission and surrender. In verse 22, David said to Ittai, Go and pass over. And Ittai the Gittite passed over, and all his men, and all the little ones that were with him. And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people passed over. The king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, and all the people passed over toward the way of the wilderness. All the country wept with a loud voice, it said. This was a sorrowful time. We're a far cry from the glory that we've been talking about with David when he captured Jerusalem, made it the capital, brought great glory there, had the desire, not just the desire, he actually brings the ark into Jerusalem. He's not actually able to build the temple yet, and that won't happen during his lifetime, but he's at least brought the ark in. He's made Jerusalem the focal point of Israel, both politically and religiously. And it's a sad scene to see him leave. It's a sad scene to see him leave in, as far as some people are concerned, disgrace. That Absalom has so captured the hearts of so many people that this one that we cheered, this one that we joyed in, right? There was the time where they sang David's praises, where David had killed his 10,000s. And now everybody loves Absalom. And now everyone's heart is turned, and now everyone's affection. Everyone started to look at the missteps. Everyone started to see the faults of David. Absalom has done nothing to help that, but to egg that on. And it's a sorrowful time. Now, according to verse 24, David does still seem to have the loyalty of the priests and the Levites. 2 Samuel 15, verse 24, Lo, Zadok also and all the Levites were with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing out of the city. It's good to see that many of those that had some degree of spiritual sensitivity were able to sniff that out. Were able to sniff out what Absalom is up to. In times of trouble, it helps to be surrounded by people that are spiritually minded. It helps to surround yourself and to be acquainted with people that actually have a spiritual sense about things, that don't care about the political side, that don't care about the fleshly side of those things, that aren't taken back by the whim of personalities. Absalom's great. Absalom's got a huge personality. He's paraded himself before the people with chariots and horses. He's good looking. He's got a nice looking young family, right? The good looking head of hair, as it mentioned in the last chapter. He looks the part. Don't surround yourself just with people that are always taken up in those kind of things. It's good to see that there were some of those that were still spiritually minded that could sniff all that stuff out, and they're still loyal to David. And David says in verse 25, the king said to Zadok, "Carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation." David tells him to carry the ark back. Now, if you're familiar with the history of Israel, you know that there have been times that Israel has seen the Ark of the Covenant as nothing but a tool, as nothing but something that they have trusted in, something that they have used or tried to use to their advantage. And David's not going to do that. David does not intend to use the ark, that symbol of God's presence. He's not going to use that as a tool of manipulation. He's not going to use that as a tool to score political points with the rest of the nation of Israel. He's not going to use it that way. And you know that's wise. That's not how we use our faith. We're not people that try to manipulate and score points in that manner. But he is going to surrender himself to God's will. He says there that if I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation. He's willing to let the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, go back to Jerusalem and put his fate in God's hands. Not trust in anything else, not trust in anything even symbolic of the Lord or his presence, but he's going to trust the Lord. And if it's God's will, he'll bring me back again and I'll see it. And at the same time, he actually can speak with a humble and chastened spirit, because he says in verse 26, "But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here am I, let him do to me as seemeth good unto him." David also realized that there was the potential that what was happening to him was the result of his own doing, was potentially a chastisement for his own sins, for his own shortcomings. And he's willing to humbly submit if that be God's cause, if that be God's purpose in this. He's not going to fight it. He's going to actually humbly take it, accept it, and surrender to it. It's not what he wants, and it's not what his hope is. In fact, when you get a chance, and we might hear in a little bit, you read Psalm number 3, psalm that was written exactly in this event, exactly in the time that Absalom had chased David out of Jerusalem. David is willing to say, though, if he thus say, if this is it, if this is my chastisement, if this is the way that my ultimate judgment falls, the Lord do what seems right. The Lord do what seems good unto him. It is hard to surrender yourself to what God has in store. To say that even if this ends poorly for me, God's doing what's right, and to accept that and to trust that. I can't imagine what David was going through here, because when I talk about troubles and when I talk about struggles or things, I've never faced anything like David's facing here. Watching one son kill the other son, watching one son rape a sister, watching one son come after him. I can't imagine what David's going through. And yet the humble, the submissive attitude to say, God's going to do what's right in this. And I know that God's going to do what's right in this. And if it is his will and he wants to bring me back to Jerusalem, there I'll go. I'll go right back into his presence, to this ark, and there I'll worship him, and there I'll abide. But if that's not what he has in plan, if this is my chastening, if this is my judgment, if he has no pleasure in me, he's right. He's right. It's hard, right? It's hard to submit to that. And yet David, in the most difficult, one of the most difficult experiences and times of his life, he has totally resigned himself to God's hands. Whatever God is going to deal in this, he's going to trust that it's right. He obviously has a hope. He obviously has one that he wants to be right and is praying that is right and is trusting that's right. And yet he has resigned himself to what God has in store, perfectly trusting and accepting it. And that's hard. That is hard, to cultivate that kind of attitude that says, even if this doesn't go well for me, I can't say God's done wrong. I can't say that God has not done right. And David seems to grasp that attitude. Now, number 3, a purposeful plan. A purposeful plan. Verse 27. The king also said unto Zadok the priest, art not thou a seer? Return into the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz thy son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. Among those in David's company was a man named Zadok, a seer, one that David could look at and see because of his character and because of his obvious gifting. This would be someone who could be a great help, could become a very valuable source of information. In verse 28, he says, after verse 27, he says, return into the city. I want you to go back. And the reason he says in verse 28, see, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me. I'm going to send you back. And I'm going to wait for word from you. That's, you know what? That's trust, right? This is a man that has earned David's trust. He obviously sees his gifts and his abilities, and he's earned David's trust. I'm going to send you back and trust that you'll get me word on how things are going in Jerusalem. And I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to this place, and there I'm going to tarry until I hear from you. Now, while he does so, it says in verse 29, Zadok therefore and Abiathar carried the ark of God to Jerusalem, and they tarried there. David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and wept as he went up, and had his head covered, and he went barefoot, and all the people that was with him covered every man his head, and they went up weeping as they went up. Signs of mourning, right? David is struck by what a great tragedy this is. Yes, there's a sense in which David is tasting the bitter fruits of the sin that he himself had committed. And yet he goes humbly and he's praying and he's weeping. Not only that, in verse 31, David finds out about what we found out about last week. Verse 31, one told David saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. We already knew that, right? Because we got the larger view last week. But now word of that actually comes to David. Now that's obviously got to bother David. And you can read in the Psalms of what David says about being betrayed by a friend. And those that he had sweet counsel with. And those that he went to the house of the Lord together with. And that hurts. It hurts to know that. Now, why did Ahithophel join the conspiracy against David? There's a number of potential reasons. The text here doesn't actually give us his motives. There's a couple reasons that maybe some could surmise as why. We've talked about it. Brother John's mentioned it before. There is a combination of scriptures that you could put together that would show you or that could imply that Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. And that this stems from some bitterness and ill will from the events that happened with Bathsheba and the killing of her husband and the adulterous affair that David had with her. That certainly could be a motive. Others may see the motive of, Ahithophel, loyalties go to the highest bidder, right? He sees the handwriting on the wall. Absalom's got the stronger hand. Absalom's getting ready to come into Jerusalem. He's, I'll stick with the winning side, or what he thought would be the winning side. There could be a sense in which he was disgruntled, maybe not necessarily with, David's past sins, but the current state of things, right? Everybody, if you talk like Absalom, right? Absalom is fueling the fire of people being disgruntled with the current administration. Politics hasn't changed much in 3,000 years, right? If you can stoke enough, unhappiness, get enough people disgruntled, People are ready for a change of pace. I don't know exactly, because the text doesn't say exactly what Ahithophel's motives were. But he turned against David. He turned and began to show loyalty to Absalom. And from the text that we've read before in chapter number 16, the Bible tells us that Ahithophel was a very respected counselor. Chapter 16, verse 23 speaks that the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired of the oracle of God. You want to know about a man who was trusted, a man who was respected, and a man who in all counts was thought to be wise, right? This is not to be seen as just, well, I lost my secretary of energy, right? No, you lost one of your high-ranking counselors. You lost one of your most trusted people. And that hurts. And that bothers David. Because now David has to pray a prayer he never thought that he would have to pray. Look at verse 31 again. David said, "O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness." How many times do you think in his life David prayed exactly the opposite of that? That he prayed, Lord, give my friend wisdom, give him understanding, help him, help me. And how many times had they, in sweet fellowship and enjoyable company, prayed for each other and loved each other? And now David is put in a spot, he's put in a compromising spot, and now he has to pray for the downfall of his friend. He has to pray that, Lord, that you'll take his wisdom, that you'll take his counsel, and that you'll nullify it. You'll make it silly. You'll turn it into foolishness. That's tough, right? When you've prayed for someone for so long, and now your prayer is actually turned, now it's something totally different. And that just kind of gives you a taste of how bad things have gotten and how low David is at times still in this story. But he did pray, Lord, turn his counsel to foolishness. And it came to pass that when David was come to the top of the mount, where he worshiped God, even when circumstances were bad, and his son has turned against him, trusted friends have turned against him, maybe in a sense, again, he feels like it's his own fault. He brought it on himself. He still worships God. And he's not actually sure. He trusts, but he doesn't know exactly what God is going to do. He couldn't promise the Gittites anything for sure. He couldn't give them any secure promise or hope of what was coming next. When he talks in those previous verses, he's not sure if the Lord will return him to see the ark again, or if this was the judgment upon which that would fall upon him. And yet he still worships, even when circumstances were bad. Right? If you wait and you only worship when circumstances are good, that's like loyalty. That's like the loyalty that these men showed when things were good. That's not just what tests someone's faithfulness or loyalty. We don't only worship when things are good. We don't only lift our praise, our prayer. We don't only come to God with thank yous because everything is great. Sometimes things aren't great. And if we stop worshiping, if we stop turning to the Lord and lifting him and exalting him because times are difficult, that speaks about us. And David, it speaks so well of him that in such a case of unsurety, he still worships. And while he's worshiping, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat rent and earth upon his head. On whom David said, If thou passest on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. Obviously, David's got a handful of loyal and faithful followers. The more that gets kind of tricky, right? It's kind of hard to go on the run with thousands of people. It's kind of hard to be in hiding with a mob. But there's, if you go with me, that's not actually going to make things easier. But here's what would work. Verse 34, If thou wilt return to the city, and say unto Absalom, I will be thy servant, O king, as I have been thy father's servant hitherto, so will I now also be thy servant. Then mayest thou for me defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. David's companion, Hushai, right? That's what he's called in 1 Chronicles 27, verse 33, his friend. Just when David worships, and David has been praying, humbly presenting himself before God and worshiping, here comes Hushai. And David's wheels begin to turn, and David begins to set a plan in motion whereby he can get information and thwart the counsel of Ahithophel. Here he's got a man that's been loyal to him, but not everybody knows that, and not everybody includes Absalom. Here's what'll work. I've got Zadok, and I got Abiathar, and I got their sons, and they're staged around the house of God, the Ark of the Covenant, and they're going to get word to me. If you'll take up a spot in the palace and you'll proclaim your loyalty to Absalom, David can have a network of spies, basically. He can have a network of men that are true to him, faithful and loyal to him, that could ultimately either get him back information or, as it says here in this verse, you could thwart the counsel of Ahithophel. Because if obviously Absalom is willing to take David's disgruntled former employees. If he'll take Ahithophel, maybe he'll take Hushai. And you get in there and you get him to trust you and you start feeding information, you start feeding ideas. That's how we defeat the counsel of Ahithophel. And hast thou not there with thee Zadok and Abiathar the priests? Therefore it shall be that what things soever thou shalt hear out of the king's house, thou shalt tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Get word to them, because they're going to get word to me. Behold, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them ye shall send unto me everything that ye can hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. This presents to us the perfect balance and the right balance, right? David, who is willing to humbly submit to whatever God's purpose is. If he'll bring me back to Jerusalem, to the ark, great. If this is the judgment that falls upon me, if he's no longer pleased with me, he's willing to accept that. He's willing to turn himself over and put his life in the hands of the Lord, right? That's trust. That is a cautious, faithful dependence. And yet at the same time, purposely begin to plan out what's next, what he can do next. While resigning himself to God's purpose, he continues to faithfully act, right, and continue to work. This last part of this chapter just shows us this contrast, right, of these different men and the way that they act in the midst of great turmoil and trouble. There are times that sometimes that handcuffs us, right? Or we get in times of trouble and we don't know what to do, so we freeze up, right? We lock up and we get stale, we get stagnant, we don't do anything. Maybe we don't worship, or we don't, submit ourselves, or we just stop doing things altogether. And yet across the board here, we're absolutely talking about great difficulty. And yet look, some of these men that saw this as an opportunity to show their mettle. Some men took this as the opportunity to finally prove their loyalty with courage and faithfulness once and for all. Some responded with prayer and worship, humbleness, faith, purposeful planning, right? Just all of these responses across the board, where we are at times struggling with that. And when we get in our bouts of trouble and we get in our times of difficulty that certainly aren't even to this level, we freeze up. And until we get some kind of assurance of what's coming next, and until we get some kind of inclination about what tomorrow is going to bring about, or we get some security, or we get some understanding, we just tense up, we freeze up. We lose all spiritual and realistic mindedness about what to do next. Some men saw this time of trouble as their opportunity to show their faithfulness and loyalty to David. David saw this as obviously a time of trouble, but to balance, I'm absolutely going to trust. I have to trust. Whatever, I don't know what God's purpose or working in this is. I will resign myself and accept my fate. What comes from the Lord's hands, I will take it. But he's not going to stop trying. He's not going to stop working. And in these last verses, he's starting to purposefully put a plan in place where, listen, if I've asked God to thwart the counsel of Ahithophel, I'm not just going to go sit under a rock. Maybe the Lord might use these kind of means. And so he begins to faithfully act and to work. And that's what we should work on, right? That us working, us trying to purposefully act is not an indication that we don't have faith, that we're not trusting, right? Would you say that about David? Would you say that David, man, by sending out spies, that he's, undercutting his own faith? No, of course not. In the book of Psalms, in Psalm number 3, and this is what we'll close with. We don't have time to get to any more there in 2 Samuel. But in Psalm number 3, listen to this. It says there in the superscription, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Yes, a son, a faithful friend that he once had, plus how many countless in Israel that had their hearts stolen by Absalom. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. This is it, right? This is like Absalom's the next king. David's done, and when Absalom catches him, he's probably going to kill him. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. You don't think David trusts the Lord? You don't think that David believes and is putting his life in the Lord's hands? Lord, you are my shield. Lord, you are the lifter up of my head. And I cried to him, and he heard me. And David is absolutely trusting the Lord. Is he 100% sure? No. He's not 100% sure, but he's believing, and he's trusting, and he's going to do his part to see what the Lord might do and what the Lord might work. And as chapter 15 ends, David has submitted, he has prayed, he has worshiped, and now he's starting to put feet on a plan to see how the Lord might use it. Okay? How do we respond to trouble? Is it a chance for us to prove our loyalty, to prove our mettle, to show our faithfulness? Do we worship? Do we submit ourselves to God? And during our trouble, can we keep focused enough to purposefully take the next step? Do what's right, do what's next, do what's right in front of us. Keep moving, keep walking, keep acting. Just some really great examples, good testimonies here from these men of the different ways they responded. Father, we're thankful to come tonight. We're grateful to be in your house. We're thankful for our friends and family that are here. Bless us tonight as